it's going to do what it's going to do. And I either surrender to it, align with it, go with it, or I kick and squirm around along the way. And it's happening. And now it's kind of a question of, I guess, how bad is it going to get?
He has Uranus right now sitting on his midheaven, and there's a square to Mars happening.
There's a lot of truth that's surfacing. Like if something has been submerged or concealed or buried or hidden, it's going to come out one way or the other. Like the G Center, you'd say, this is a person who could be everyone and no one.
Imaga is that royal lineage of the throne, the king, ancestral rulership. Those are all the significations.
John Cole is a seasoned astrologer and certified human design analyst with over 30 years of experience in traditional astrological systems and more than a decade working with the human design system. A 2/4 ego projector with the channel of initiation, John co-founded the Human Design Collective, where he and his partner Amy guide people towards greater clarity, alignment, and purpose through education, consulting, and community dialogue in the human design system. In this part 2 episode, we go even deeper into how these frameworks intersect, examining how we can track the background frequency of the world using human design transits and astrological cycles, and how both systems can be combined to interpret world events and public figures. We also take a rare expert-level deep dive into the combined astrology and human design charts of Donald Trump, unpacking what they reveal about his nature, life path, and karmic themes. This is a masterclass in integrative chart analysis, a valuable opportunity to learn from a practitioner with over 3 decades of experience navigating these systems with wisdom, nuance, and precision.
Anyway, yeah, it's a bit weird that it's been a full year since we saw each other, since we met last. Kind of time goes by fast. For anyone who's watching this now, for context, John, at that meeting, came straight from the dentist, so half his mouth was numb at the time. And by the looks of it, I came straight from a fresh haircut. So we were just kind of like straight in there.
I remember when that video came up, I'm like, wait, what's going on? It's like my face is paralyzed. And then I remembered I'd come straight from some major dental work and my whole half of my face was numb. I was like, why am I talking like that?
We looked at, astrology and human design being possibly like a predetermined or sort of fated system for people to understand themselves. We talked about how it cuts away the unnecessary suffering in someone's life by aligning to what they're meant to be doing, what their karma is meant to be doing. We discussed that idea of you've got that necessary suffering, which you're here for in your life, and that's kind of your karma, and your unnecessary suffering being the sort of mental rumination and the resistance against that. Doing a bit of a comparison between that topic of what astrology can tell about a person, what human design can tell about a person, but what we can learn when we put them both together. I've actually been working on a little video series to kind of put that together with some of my ideas of, okay, here's what astrology can tell you about yourself. Here's what human design can tell you about yourself. But here's where some of them, here's where human design can't tell you about this or astrology can't tell you about that. I think there's many different cases of that. For example, in astrology, we have a lot of the upayas, the remedies. There's this idea that, this fate is fixed, but there's also in that Vedic ecosystem, there's a lot of the mantras, the rituals, the certain actions that you could take that these Vedic types would say, okay, this will alleviate the karma. That's sort of the remedy. But in human design, there is no sort of remedy. It's sort of set in place. The remedy to deal with that karma, in a sense, is the strategy and authority.
Yeah. This question of how much control do we actually have over our lives? I guess that's one way of saying it. How much of this are we doing? How much of this are we choosing? That's been a question that I've been wrestling with or holding for a while now, decades, I guess. But getting into human design brought that into a certain kind of view, or I get to look at it through a different lens. And it's almost like for me, it's been a little bit of a pendulum swing. I've had times where I feel like, okay, this is all predetermined and there's very little choice in all of this. And then interestingly enough, I've been kind of swinging back the other direction where I just keep coming back to like, no, I feel like there is some choice. And it has to almost be built into the nature of things, into the program, into the Maya. Even if it's not choice as we normally think of it, I think we have to almost operate as if we do, in a way. I don't think it really serves us to sit there and just think that everything is written and fated from the moment we're born. And then I start thinking of it more from almost like a game theory, or if I was a game designer, or if I was designing a simulation or something along those lines, you would want to build in an element of randomness, at least, or chance, or hazard, or something that came up that allowed, the equivalent of a roll of a dice, so that it was interesting. Otherwise, if everything was already preset and predetermined, there's no point in really playing the game. And I think some meaning is lost in that process along the way. If nothing really matters because it's all predetermined, then it takes the meaning out of it. And so I'm kind of in this kind of swing between the two, but leaning a little bit more towards there's got to be some choice. And maybe the choice is how we meet things, how we meet what's already written. And that's where you mentioned like the remedies that show up in Vedic astrology, which we don't have things like that in human design. But I start thinking about those. It's like, well, is wearing a stone or doing a mantra going to really make a difference in one's life? And I think it could, but why? Like, why would it? And what's coming up for me now is, it's a kind of intention. We're bringing a kind of consciousness, into play by kind of taking on a mantra and then having the discipline to practice it or to do it, wearing a stone that we choose and we pay for and we go through. These are ways I think that we kind of participate in a more conscious level with things, and we're meeting life in maybe a more creative space. And so I don't know. I tend to go that direction with it than some sort of like magical, like something's going to be bestowed on me from the outside or anything like that.
It's definitely not an easy starter question, is it? Because we went quite deep into fate and free will mechanics, essentially. And that's obviously something that's been discussed by, hundreds and thousands of philosophers through the years. That's an age-old thing. But it's really kind of underpins the two systems. I've heard plenty of stories of, the folks who are immersed in the sort of Vedic world. They'd be doing the yogas and the mantras, and some of they'd get various types of readings, and they would do this sort of list of, the pujas, the rituals. And they would go through this kind of preset list, and they said themselves that, one guy was saying, well, my son was meant to be in danger, but then I did this sort of mantras, rituals, and then he still had an accident, but it wasn't fatal, that sort of thing. You kind of hear those stories a lot in that Vedic worldview. But at the same time, human design has a little bit more of the Daoist perspective of essentially saying, look, what will happen. You try and navigate it with your decision making. That's the only there's no like changing the fate. I think Ra said, no choice, but as you say, acting as if we do. It's beneficial to act as if we do. And the main remedy, the main technique is, strategy and authority. So it seems like we're trying to synthesize those two, but it has to come together somehow. But it's hard to balance those out, right?
One of the ways that I've been thinking about this, and I wrote a couple articles along these lines because I was trying to work out my own thought process. Nature's deciding on a certain level. And then we have to kind of define what we mean by nature. But, I would say our nature decides, so for example, in human design, we have this concept of inner authority, which is usually talked about as a center that has certain kind of predominance over our decision-making process, or it represents kind of the primary decision-making process. And for me, that's the heart center. That's the ego, or the heart center, the will. And what I've noticed experimenting with human design over the years is that when my will or my heart moves, it's not like I'm consciously directing it or choosing it. It's more that it's going to do what it's going to do. And I either surrender to it, align with it, go with it, or I kick and squirm around along the way and try to make it something else. And so even in that, it's like, well, that's the funny thing about authority is we're not consciously choosing our authority. We're not doing our authority. We're surrendering to it. We're going with it. We're aligning with it, whatever it is. And until there's a sense of like either settledness or clarity, or this is just what it is, it's non-negotiable. And so that's kind of the most immediate level. If we frame it through human design, is like, well, we don't really choose, or we don't direct how our authority responds or what it does or doesn't do. But then I think that there's something even larger than that. And I think it's, when I say nature decides, I think when we look at these cosmic patterns through astrology and human design and a lot of the kind of the imprint that we get at our birth or 3 months before the birth, things are in a way set in stone. Like that imprint in that time of birth in which we came into the world, that is what it is. We don't go back and change that. We always have that as a point of reference. We also know, like we probably talked a lot about this in the last talk, but we know when we're going to do our Saturn return. We know what every major transit's going to be. All that's already set. And we probably, it seems like we have a trajectory, a movement, a certain kind of, a direction that's set at the time of birth that the life unfolds through and plays out. So, when we think about our larger nature or our, being part of nature, and then our relationship to these planets is something like signposts that then give us a sense of what that means or what that looks like. I think that's more of what's going on, at least the way it looks to me. It's like we're really just aligning with what's already kind of in place and going with that. And is there an actual choice in there? Are we deciding at some point? I don't know. I really don't. That could be predetermined as well. But I like to play along like I've got some choice. I really do. I feel like it's not as fun, and it gets kind of weird too if I'm just running around. No choice.
Yeah.
All right. It's hard to deal with the rest of the world.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's 2 good points that you made there. There is the fact that, you can accept that both astrology and human design are pointing towards a certain fatedness. And as you say, that trajectory is set into place when you're born. But so many people have also said, well, it doesn't mean that we can just sort of relax and lay back and say, well, my life is going to happen no matter what I do. Because as you say, it's like a video game. If a character can realize he's maybe in a video game for like 5 minutes or something, but you're going to get bored. Your mind is going to start to crave doing things. You might have that intellectual idea of, well, the path is set and what's going to happen is going to happen. But you need the engagement and the motivation to pursue your goals, to do certain things. And those desires are sort of automatic in a sense. It's very desire led. You might say, okay, what's going to happen is going to happen, but try and not do anything for a couple of weeks to a couple of months. It's just not going to happen. You're gonna be able to say that and then say, well, I'd like to start working on this now, or I might want to move over there now. The desires are automatically set. And that's a very, Buddhist, Hindu thing. Those desires are essentially cause the thoughts, cause the actions, cause the karmas. No matter if you have that intellectual realization of, okay, this is probably where things are going, maybe long term, archetypally, you still need the engagement in the game. You still need to, as I say, beneficial to act as if we do have choice, because it becomes interesting and there's actual stakes involved with the game of life. And, it's more motivating, I think, to say, well, I can make this happen, so I'm going to go harder for it. Or there's a threat of this loss, so I'm going to go for it. You can kind of have those nice peaceful moments with the fated map and say, well, thank God it's going to be, a certain way anyway. That can come in handy when you're sort of suffering, or in a poor mental health state. You can say, oh, look, well, this is just what's happening and it's sort of destined to a certain extent. But if you want to really have motivation to build your life, you can only be in that frame of mind where I am responsible for my life. If I want to get certain things achieved, I have to do them. And so that's the benefit of the actor on the stage, I suppose, who's plays the character.
Yeah. I think it's a great point. And I think it also gets to, in a way, what it means to be human, or to be, the way I kind of see it is we are a subset, or we're almost like a fragment of creation, of the divine, of the universe. And yet we seem to have something of a separate autonomous existence in a way, even though it's very interdependent with everything else going on. But there does seem to be something here where I don't know if we're formally asked, but there is this possibility that we can take control or ownership of our lives and ourselves in a way that I think leads to a different way of being, or a different level of being in the world. Like, I'm thinking about, are you familiar with the teachings of G.I. Gurdjieff, the Fourth Way teachings? Have you run across that?
I've run across Gurdjieff, but I've never read the books or done the practice. I know his face. I can picture the face.
It's an unforgettable face.
Yeah.
It's something I had studied for years. I'd gotten pretty into it back in the 90s and 2000s. And anyway, it's interesting spiritual tradition teaching that's called the Fourth Way, generally speaking, or Gurdjieff's teachings. And one of the things that comes up from that, in terms of this idea of free will, is that free will is not something like real will, real choice. Is not something that's just given automatically by nature of just being a human, but it's something that we can develop. That's something that we can attain through certain efforts, through a certain way of working, through developing a certain level of presence or being. And I think what they're getting at there is that if we can get beyond some of our more reactive, automatic ways of moving through life, or certain kind of very reactive or automatic unconscious patterns, and bring more awareness or presence in the moment, then we're in a better position where we actually potentially could make what would be considered more of a conscious choice about what we're doing or not doing, rather than being just driven by unconscious biological drives all the time, right? And so that's something that I think is sometimes left out of these conversations, at least in the world of human design and astrology. It's like, do we have choice or not? But I think that there's maybe something in the middle. There's like, well, most people don't, but we can, we can develop it.
Yeah, I think that really rhymes with a lot of the, you'll hear a lot of Indian sages in the Vedic kind of worldview. They'll say, well, the astrology chart didn't apply to this saint or sage because he did his sadhanas, he did his yogic practices for decades and shifted, the karmas in a certain state. You'll note, your sad guru types, your Indian guru types will say, do things consciously enough through the sadhanas, through the yogic, energetic exercises, the yamas and the niyamas, your food, the very structured, disciplined skills and techniques that they develop, in an ashram setting. And you do things consciously enough and develop your nervous system and your awareness to a certain level that they believe they can start shifting the inherent karmas, which is why they'll kind of suggest we can make predictions for someone who's the householder, the layman, who's not on a spiritual path. But if someone's putting in years and years of serious work into the yogic sadhana, the meditation, the ashram kind of life, they won't predict, because the karmas are going to get shifted and they may not play out. And especially, I think the top example of this was Ramana Maharshi, who's sort of one of the top tier Indian Vedanta guys. And they said, well, and even the astrologist said, it just doesn't work. It's just not adding up, like nothing's happening. And he's kind of in this different state because of the decades or lifetimes of sadhana and yogic management and karmic management, spiritual discipline, which has gotten to that state. Talking about kind of practical integration, we've got this very high level fate and free will, but we also talked about integration of astrology and human design with other modalities. You mentioned the human design informed therapies or astrology informed modalities. Have you seen anyone doing any more of this work? Do you know anyone who's kind of combining these? Like, what's the sort of state? Is there anyone who's running certain businesses or modalities which are human design informed? I wondered if that's been developed since last time we've met.
I think a lot of people are either doing it or working on it. Like I know therapists who use either astrology or human design or both, coaches. We've even got students in our classes and colleagues who are working it into like art therapy or more creative pursuits, working with other people, personal training. I've heard about people who have, incorporated human design or a basic understanding of it into how they're working with their clients on a physical fitness level. So I think it's just continuing to grow, and there's more and more of it out there, which kind of makes sense. I mean, it's the way I'm looking at human design these days and astrology is they're just maps. They're just lenses that we can pick up, and we have these different reference points or vantage points looking through each. And I think that's, in a lot of ways, that's probably more of what's needed than a bunch of human design analysts or more astrologers running around. I think that there's obviously a place for a human design analyst or a technical astrologer where that's their primary focus. But I think most of what's probably going to, be of service or supportive in the world is human design in real life, astrology in real life, not, just going and getting a reading and having someone, talk about your chart.
And that's kind of the kind of cutting edge of the application. I suppose you'd need people who've been doing the standard readings for a good chunk of time to get the experience. And those guys could then be in a position to, put it with different modalities, with different therapies, to sort of bring it more into the real world sort of thing. But so I think that makes sense. You'd need a sort of a conveyor belt, I guess, of like the beginner astrologers, new astrologers to get trained up in the basics, if that's what they choose to do with their life, and then the more experienced folk who've been doing it for a good while can start to implement it in other ways if they can make that sustainable. But that makes sense that's sort of the cutting edge of using these techniques.
Yeah, and I think it helps with actually verifying the system out in the world, to get out there and say, hey, is this actually helping people? Is it making the process easier or allowing people to get results more quickly if they have an understanding of their design or their nature on that level? I think a lot of times what happens in in a human design kind of community, so to speak, or an astrological community, it begins to get a little bit like an echo chamber. You've got people who you've got to learn the language, and then you've got to use the terminology, and then you start talking to other people about it. But at some point it gets pretty insulated, and that's okay if you're going to go deep and you got like a research group or you're in a class or a course, or that's just that's the point in a certain activity. But I really feel like this stuff needs to, if it's going to have real value, it's got to be applicable out in the world and in real life. And so that might look like being able to to talk about it in ways that the average person can understand, or, in language that's, just plain English, as opposed to start just like rattling off numbers, and numbers and human design concepts, which is a lot of what, will often happen. And for those of us who are well versed in it, it's like, okay, it's almost like shorthand. We can get there really quick. So it's kind of nice to share that common language. But if you're not well versed in it, or if you're new to it, it starts sounding kind of weird. People feel, either excluded or left out, or they don't know what you're talking about. And so I think, that's also something that probably needs to be looked at as well.
Yeah, I agree, because you have to kind of understand the technical language of these systems first, but they're ultimately designed to help people on the ground. So you need to be able to learn the technical, formulas, the words, what's happening, and then distill that down to actually help people on the ground. And I suppose there's many practical benefits, even with just traditional astrology for, practical business benefits. I've seen a lot of people say they're building a business or a product, or it's a business based around certain aspects of their personality, of their values, of their strengths. People would take a look at an astrological chart and say, this is adding up for you here. You've got this quality here. You can design brands or products around that to improve your marketing or timing of a business. This is obviously going to be an excellent time to start the business. I think the language gets translated into many different useful contexts for people on the ground. Not only just to, as we were saying, the maps that just kind of contextualize and frame what's going on, but a sort of helping hand to say, yeah, you should do it like this. This is the best time to do it. You're not crazy for thinking about that. So that enables the action on the ground to happen. I think that's both astrology and human design. It's the guidance system. It's not just like, okay, here's the technical language, but it's like these two maps are confirming your inner suspicions. It's going to enable people to act on what they were going to do anyway. It's a sort of obstacle remover. People are going to get blocked maybe with mental fears or outside situations. Or should I start this business? I'm not too sure. Maybe I'm crazy. You get these two maps involved. Someone goes to an astrologer. That's the whole purpose. It's sort of in the Vedic worldview as well. It's like unblocking the karma, making way for that. Astrological meeting could be the one thing that gives someone the confidence to take on a new path. So that's the sort of metaphysics and the practicality all happening at once.
I totally agree.
Just to get back to 2027 point, we talked about distrust. We've seen riots in Paris recently. We've got LA happening right now. We've got mainstream media being distrusted. We've got lots of what was kind of predicted by the human design system coming to fruition. Do you see how's your sort of perspective on 2027 been shaped since the last time we talked?
Well, it feels like we're further down the road, and it's what we all thought might happen. Looking at this cross of planning that's kind of going into the rearview mirror now, and the sleeping phoenix coming in. Also changing from basically a first line world to a 6 line world as part of that change of the global cycles. Yeah, it's happening. And now it's kind of a question of, I guess, how bad is it going to get on a certain level in terms of the breakdown of our institutions, of our governments, of our faith in anything out in the collective. It just seems like that's all being called into question. And it does feel like we're in the middle of some sort of creative, mutative birthing process, I guess. And but we're not through the birth canal. We're still having labor pains, and probably will for the next couple of years, it seems like. And then there does seem to be something on the other side of that, but I don't really know. I don't really know what that's going to look like. I see things come out like the telepathy tapes and a lot of the stuff that was, kind of predicted by Rob 20 something years ago, where it was almost verbatim what he was describing, in terms of like some of the new beings that will be coming into the world around this time, that we're seeing through, that view of autism and some of the abilities that those kids are demonstrating. So there's a lot, I think, that continues to get reinforced, and it's exciting on a certain level. I think, in the midst of all of the uncertainty, the chaos, and the kind of the concerns, I guess, that we would all have, the part that I'm enjoying is it feels like there's a lot of truth that's surfacing. Like if something has been, submerged or concealed or buried or hidden, it's going to come out one way or the other. I think most things will, and they are. And so from that spectator viewpoint and entertainment, it's really interesting. And I've been interested in these topics for a long time, since I was pretty young. What maybe you would consider conspiracies or, mystical things or UFOs or extraterrestrials, all the stuff that just we're being blasted with today,
Yeah, exactly. It must be a real treat because, I suppose if you're from the 90s generation or pre-internet generation, it's like you maybe read in a magazine or you could only speculate on your own ideas. And now, let's say last 5 years, We've had tons of UFO stuff. We've had, they think they found some sort of structure underneath the pyramids. That kind of stuff is happening. We got all the celebrity and the well, I don't want to trip up the algorithm here, but, celebrity lists, let's say, Hollywood lists. And I think crucially, the sort of materialist paradigm, I don't think we're going away from materialist paradigm. I think we're including that and being grateful for all the things that the scientific materialist paradigm has given us. But we're now seeing the limitations of it and giving a bit more credence to the, let's say, the trans-rational or the trans-material aspects of reality, which, astrology and human design definitely come under. And let's talk about that difference between human design and astrology, because if I was using human design, let's talk about Donald Trump, I wouldn't have indicated anything was going to happen with him this week. But we've had many astrologers rightly calling out on the astrological side. He has Uranus right now sitting on his midheaven, and there's a square to Mars happening. I think this is happening. I think this Mars-Uranus square is happening exactly on Saturday, which I think is also his birthday on June 14th. It's a solar return. It's his birthday. Now, obviously, we've seen the significations of Mars and Uranus recently with, fast-acting aggression, aggressive words, with the LA situation. But this square, which is part of the synodic cycle, if we go back to July last year, where we had the Mars-Uranus conjunction direct on his midheaven, that was, some people correctly predicted, he was in trouble there, the possible assassination attempt. I think a few astrologers called that maybe a week or two before. Now we're coming to the square of Mars and Uranus, so people are sort of anticipating something similar in nature to be happening. And there's certainly a lot of fiery, fast-moving military energy going on with LA. I think the square goes direct. But that is like, as we were saying, it's an example of the context that we can get from astrology, which isn't always so obvious with human design. Now, I'm not so well versed in the human design transits, but maybe we could take a look at Donald Trump's chart, Vedic, tropical Vedic, and the human design chart, kind of compare what we can see, maybe transits wise or just personality wise. I mean, I'll hand it to you a little bit. I mean, obviously a lot of astrology community are pointing out the Uranus right on his midheaven there, and we're having a square to Mars in Leo. This is a part of the synodic cycle of the assassination attempt last year. Some people are saying what's happening in LA is indicative of this. I mean, let's look at, what would you interpret, what are you seeing in there transits wise off the bat?
Yeah, I hadn't even looked at his chart in a while or these transits. So when you were describing them, I was like, oh, wow, I wasn't aware that all this was going on. But it does seem to be pretty interesting. Like you'd mentioned, you've got Uranus getting ready to go over the top of his chart. It's already conjoined his midheaven. Now it's applying to his ascendant degree, 29 Taurus, up at the top of the 10th house. And at the same time as he's doing a solar return, which I would interpret as these events are probably going to color his entire year, right? So these are significant influences at this time. So having Uranus at the height of the chart, you're also looking at a Mercury return. You've got the sun had just gone over the North Node, and there's all of his Gemini placements, and Mars down there getting ready to cross his ascendant as it's doing its Mars return. I think this is a pivotal time. This is what's going on over these next couple of days, I think will affect and color the rest of the year for him. And, and probably have bigger effects, repercussions than just, passing influences on a weekly basis. So it does seem pretty significant. I look at all this stuff, even like, the reality that we're living in these days, it's getting more and more difficult to sort out what is actually real and what's not real, right? We've got, on some level, everything is basically a production, whether we're talking about just literally like, media coverage, which is a production, and Donald Trump, we know is no stranger to to celebrity or being on camera or, ratings and viewership. And so, it just plays straight into that. But yeah, this is kind of concerning. It looks like this is a significant, series of events that are happening right now that, he's taking action on. I'm looking at that Mars return and getting ready to cross the ascendant and go into the first house. It kind of looks like he might hit the gas more than the brakes as we go forward and push things a bit. And
because it's so true. It's so true. You were saying, last year we didn't have the Google VO3, this new AI video thing. I mean, that's come out recently. And that's been a game changer for the media technology. And it's sort of an example of where astrology can give us context where human design can't, because I see all of that stuff now through the Saturn-Neptune conjunction in Aries, which is happening. I think it's going exact in 2026, but it's, Neptune's just shifted into Aries, Saturn's just shifted into Aries. Neptune, the boundless imagination, and Saturn, the concretization, and both coming together. We're getting media that's almost indistinguishable. That, especially with the VO3 stuff, is completely wild. And I think it's, as you say, it's affecting our sense of reality. Even with the events in LA, your perspective is entirely dependent on the media that you're consuming. And the media, there's both sides are not going to be quite as objective as they could be, right? I think, Trump saying, well, look what's happening in LA. This is what's happening. You're seeing what's happening in LA, and this is what's happening. We don't have an objective view of what's happening. We just get what's coming through the social media, what's coming through the certain videos, what the algorithm promotes. It's not like we've obviously got on the ground footage, but as you say, local media is a production. On the ground, people with their phones are going to capture some things more than others. It's not like we have objective truth of that. And we've got Trump sort of, Mars return, becoming more of a military figure, the solar return, emphasizing his reputation again. And I think if you want to use perfection years, the Hellenistic perfection years, his birthday is Saturday, I think. And that starts an 8th house perfection year. So heavier, obviously 8th house, heavier psychological territory, losses, transformations, identity shifts, general crises type things. It's a heavier, I think the next year he's going to be more heavy handed, but I think, he's got this Jupiter going into, everyone's got Jupiter going into Cancer exalted these days. And I think in the solar return chart, he has a Venus in Taurus. So I don't think it's going to be a repeat of last year's assassination attempt, but I think there's a lot of aggression, a lot of fire around him. Maybe he'll send in more guards. Maybe something will happen maybe at the military parade that he's having. And these are just examples of how astrology can contextualize things maybe a bit more than the human design chart. I mean, I was wondering if you could pull up the human design chart and just sort of see personality wise, what can we get out of him? Basically, what can we read?
So this is what I have for him. Birth data, June 14th, 1946, 10:54 a.m., Queens, New York. That's the chart we're using. That's what I was using in the astrology software, I believe. So, you've got a pretty powerful manifesting generator, someone who's not, let's say, a stranger to conflict and crisis. This is a cross of Eden in the incarnation cross. So we've got the 36 and the 6 over on the design side, and the third line, 1-3 profile. Learn by doing, learn by breaking things, learn by making mistakes and figuring out what works and what doesn't work. He's got a curious chart, because when I've looked at this before, I was pretty surprised to see that 1-3 profile. I was like, wow, he seems just so outgoing and just so, often wanting to be in the spotlight, and does not seem like a super introspective, kind of personality or, that you would expect. And maybe that's because he's just got this heavily defined throat, 3 channels going into the throat, the 2 manifestor channels, the 4521, the 3536, that he's always displaying. It's always some sort of a display, but this suggests that there, underneath it all, there is a certain level of insecurity, I would expect, and kind of there is some introspection, whether it looks like it or not. And hopefully, with the 1-3 profile, someone who learns through experience, and we can only hope that that will factor into how we move forward, or how he's moving forward. But yeah, this is, you got a 4521. This is someone who likes being in charge, likes being king. Is pretty comfortable with that. 845, someone who's probably had a lot of experiences, things that have probably, things that he's shared and things that he probably shouldn't have shared along the way, and then the 59-6, which is kind of interesting. I would imagine that unconscious 59-6 is, besides the fact that it's the channel of mating, it seems that he's got a certain emotional depth, a certain emotional depth and a certain emotional capacity and a creative capacity underneath everything, but it gets expressed through this channel of crisis, conflict, and then hopefully on the other end there is a sense of progress, in the end. But those are some of my initial thoughts just looking at this chart.
When I was first testing out some human design, like just when I was coming across it for the first time, I was looking at the chart, I was trying to figure out what I could see, and I was really surprised to see the completely open G center. Because I was saying, well, it doesn't make sense. A completely open G center is meant to indicate someone who doesn't really know what they want to be when he grows up. But he's got this very powerfully defined ego center. Like, no one knows that they are Donald Trump as much as Donald Trump knows that he's Donald Trump, right? Mm-hmm. He's got a super powerful ego center. I love it when he refers to himself in the third person.
So, I don't know what it is. It's sort of Trump derangement syndrome, I guess they call it, but
actually refer to himself in the third person, like, and you complement that with the Leo ascendant, the king, the ruler, the lion. You've got Mars and a Leo ascendant, absolute powerhouse. And this very well-defined ego center with the channel of the materialist. So we're saying, okay, well, this guy's, he knows who he is, and he's channel of the materialist, excellent at managing resources. So why doesn't he know what he wants to be when he grows up? No gates at all activated in the G center. But then you kind of think about it. It's like, well, what is Trump's career? It's not like you can say, what's Trump, what do you want to do when you grow up? What's your committed, focused identity? It's not like Trump has stuck at being a real estate person his entire life. You've got, he did real estate, he did TV, then he's like, okay, I'll switch to Trump trading cards or Trump Tower. Then I'm going to do casinos. Then, okay, well, but the ultimate direction must be to be the president then. Like, I need to have that ultimate direction. So therefore I'll now be the president. And then I think maybe if he doesn't get to the end of his term, or if his life longevity seems to be, he's quite a powerhouse, so I think he'll live a little bit longer. He may even evolve into something else after the president. You think the president would sort of be the final form of this is my direction, but I have a sense he'll maybe go off into a religious sort of thing. Maybe if his health gets too much, if he can't perform the duties of the leadership. He's very Christian, very orderly, very traditional Christian upbringing. He's had that miracle surviving the assassination attempt. He's referencing Christian ideals more and more. And he's an old man. He's 79. I think he's going to be thinking about his mortality and that thing. But that's why it started to make sense. Okay, open G, you telling me that Donald Trump doesn't know what he wants to be when he grows up? Well, kind of yes, because he's been shifted in so many different directions and become so many different things. But he knows who he is. And he knows what the brand is. Because I think if you look at the astrological chart, I think Mars, I might be wrong, might be dead wrong, but the ascendant or Mars is in the Vedic nakshatra of Magha, which is the kind of, I think, I could very well be wrong, but from...
It is the ascendant.
Yeah. Imaga is that royal lineage of the throne, the king, ancestral rulership. Those are all the significations. And there's definitely a whole thing with the Trump lineage, the Trump family name. That is the brand.
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually, I just looked, it's both the ascendant and Mars are both in Maga. So,
and that's with your tropical signs and the Vedic nakshatra, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes sense. Makes sense. So, I mean, it's a good example of like how you can piece together bits from the astrological chart that complement things that you see in the human design chart.
Yeah, I would say, if you look at both the completely open head center and the completely open G center that you were referring to, these are areas where there's the potential for kind of everything and nothing, in a way. When I see a completely open center, like the G center, you'd say, this is a person who could be everyone and no one, at the same time, right? Because there's no limitation. There's nothing fixed there. You completely open G center is like a chameleon. So, he's got this ability to kind of keep reinventing himself in all these different ways, right? And I think if someone had a more strong, defined G center, that wouldn't be as easy. That would be more difficult to do that. I think with the completely open head center, I'm thinking back to his late nights on Twitter, and just like getting all caught up in all these conversations and exchanges. And why are you tweeting at 3 or 4 a.m.? And it's like, is that an example of thinking about things that really don't matter, that you shouldn't be doing as president of the United States, is getting up in this argument with someone on Twitter? But yeah, I don't know. He probably, on a positive level, could, find inspiration in a lot of different places and find a lot of things in life interesting, both as a first line personality and having a completely open head. When I look at the spleen and the root, I see a spleen like that, and that's usually someone who's got to learn over time what's healthy and not. It's not someone who comes into the world with a hardwired innate capacity for sorting out, when to let go of something, when, what's going to be beneficial, what's healthy, what's not. So that's hopefully something that's learned over time, where there's, a certain amount of awareness and wisdom, kind of developed in that area. And again, if you're talking about someone who's 79 at this stage of their life, you'd hope that 1-3 has worked a few things out the hard way, and it looks like, he probably has. It remains to be seen how all this goes. And then that undefined root with the 53 and the 52, sensitive to pressure, sensitive to stress, probably's learned the hard way about getting ahead of themselves or trying to do too much too fast, not honoring his own clarity and timing of the moment, being pushed to do too much or driven too hard. It's interesting that the 52 and 53 are in there as dormant potentials, because I would see, those as the most likely themes that would come up when he was under stress or pressure, which with the 52 to go to a place of stillness and hold, which could be interesting to consider how that might play out. That's his Mercury. I'm just looking at it now. It's Mercury in the 6th line. He may have some way that he's learned to still his mind or to quiet his mind or to kind of, in the midst of all the chaos and the crisis to get focused on something, intellectually that can then kind of help him deal with the pressure and stress. I don't, maybe he works crossword puzzles or something. I don't know, but,
that's an awesome sort of delineation. And I suppose that's a way of extracting some information that's kind of primary with the human design system, is getting the gate, the line, and then the planet both at once. Mm-hmm. I couldn't understand the personality. I mean, if any of these planets in gates is emphasized the most in human design, it seems to be obviously the sun being the primary one. I could never wrap my head around the gate 12, line 1. Does your software give you the interpretations there? Because
it's really weird. I mean, check this out. I was looking at that too. It's called the monk.
Line 1,
withdrawal that can only be Yeah.
Go on.
I mean,
Go on. Yeah.
this is known as like, a gate that will often, not have a lot to say. It's cautious in communication. It's cautious in expressing itself. It's worried about being understood or not. Can the person actually hear me? They're going to be able to get me. Withdrawal that can only be maintained with communal support. The expression of social withdrawal and its value when supported by others. That's what I'm kind of wondering about, is like you have these themes, and on the surface, he seems very just kind of almost kind of blustering, or just, erratic, or he's just going to say, there's no filter. He just says whatever he's going to say and do whatever he's going to do. But the human design view of things brings us into kind of a different, I don't know, a different way of seeing it, where I think he's a little bit more thoughtful and pensive in a way than maybe it seems. I would imagine more introspective, there is more of an internal probably struggle that he's working with, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's an odd one. It's to consider the head guy in the world right now, and it's a throat gate, no, is it?
Yep.
Throat center gate. Mm-hmm. So there is that communicative aspect, and in his astrology chart, it is it's in Gemini. I think it's 11th house, and it's conjunct Uranus, which lends itself more to the erratic communication style.
Yeah.
The Sun, Uranus in Gemini lends itself more to erratic communication style. But I was also trying to get my head around the gates, that 12th gate, first line.
Yeah, and he's got that 12 twice. The 12-4 is called the prophet, the ability to foresee and plan for the end of the standstill. It's the design north node, which is, usually nodes represent just the environment and the others, the themes in our life and the other people that we're going to run into. So the nodes, even though they are activations in our chart, they're usually not quite as, they're usually not interpreted as much of our part of our personality, or it's a part where the environment brings that characteristic or that theme out of us. Is that often happens as well. So he's got these interesting themes that do seem to kind of point to him playing this role at this time. And when he first came onto the scene, I was just in disbelief. I was like, I couldn't take any of it serious. Like, back in the beginning of the first election when he was running, I thought there's just no way that this guy would even make it, to the point to where, that's who we, had a choice to vote for. But he did. And now, our world's kind of turned inside out, and I've kind of, I guess my view of it has evolved a little bit to where now it almost feels like, going back to the early part of our conversation, that, he's not choosing or all of this either. He didn't choose this any more than, like, I think, I necessarily chose what I'm doing here in my life right now. There was a series of events that led to this point, and there were possible choices along the way. That's other discussion, but, it's almost like he got tapped to play this role, like literally almost throwing the Joker card or the Trump card in this whole
Trump card. Yeah.
Yeah. Like literally, and it's gotten to the point where whoever is, whoever or whatever is behind, the orchestration and the scripting of all of this, it's turned, I was talking to my partner Amy about this the other day, and it's almost like the algorithms in our systems, in our computers, and in our technology are just now being revealed in daily life. Like, the algorithms have jumped out of the technology and off the screen and off the computer to where now it's just happening in the larger construct, in the Maya. And I feel like that's what we're looking at with Trump as well. Like, this is a, it's theater on a certain level. And that doesn't mean that there's not real things happening and that, there aren't real concerns. And, I'm not trying to diminish any of it, but I do think that there is an element of it that is, this is just, it's theater. It's a production of some sort that's being put on that we're all playing some role in. And here this guy has been pushed out front to play this role, whether it's his choice or not.
Yeah. And that theater metaphor is something that comes up in the Vedic Indian worldview, but also in like the Greek, the Stoic worldview as well. That's plenty of references in the Indian canon to the soul coming in to play the role, to play the character, to perform the karmas, similar to how the Stoics would say, well, we've got this word persona, which comes from the mask, which these Greek playwrights and actors would be, they'd be playing the person on the stage in that sort of auditorium, that Greek auditorium, that Greek theater. That word persona comes from the mask that we come into play. So this idea of you've come into this particular body, these are the certain actions you're going to do, this is how the theater will roll, is definitely something that comes up cross-culturally, which can be useful because you can then detach yourself from, you can relatively reduce the resistance and for a little bit if you're suffering with it. But then, as you say, the best thing about a movie and a theater is when you get super immersed in it. There's no point in all of the actors realizing that, well, we're actors, so we'll stop the play. We can realize we're actors for a little bit, but then the best thing about the movie and the play is the immersion. That the genuine, the thrill of a character getting revenge or the genuine threat of loss keeps everything going. And just to come back to his chart, let's say Mr. Donald was our client here. I think, is gate 21 the gate of the egoist? Am I right on that one?
It's 26. 26 is the egoist. 21's the hunter biting through, or the gate of control.
So he's got K2 with the egoist, and I think he's does he have it twice? No. Yeah, he's got it twice. He's got moon K2.
Conjunction.
Which is great, a significator, gate of the egoist twice.
Right. And if it's combined with the south node, astrologically, the suggestion would be that, that's something that he knows so well, is that what's in it for me, right? That's gate 26. It's got to be good for me. Maximum reward, minimum effort. It's the gate of persuasion, selling, manipulating, and if it's again conjoined K2, then there's something that's part of his security strategy. That's part of his security paradigm, and something that's very familiar and comes easy to him. To be to be the big ego in the room, because the 26 is pointing at the 44. Channels want to complete themselves, so the 26 is looking for the 44, and it can feel to the person who's missing that gate, like Trump in this case, that there's something lacking there. There's something that he needs, or something to be developed. And, the 44 is this gate coming to meet, the gate of alertness. And it's a kind of a certain instinct for meeting people, meeting situations, meeting life in the moment without preconceptions, and there's an instinctual component as well. Like when we're looking at a lot of these gates of the spleen, we've got gates of instinct, of intuition, and the 44 is a gate of instinct that has this kind of, I would say, genetic or built-in fear of what killed us in the past. It's said to be the fear of extinction. So looking at that from a not self kind of standpoint, if that 26 is putting pressure on the 44, Trump could feel like, that could be a major area of focus for him. Well, I've got to save, I'm going to have to show up and do my big ego thing and persuade and manipulate and manage and shape all this so that we can save ourselves, so that we can survive as a species. So, it's tribal, and he has a very strong tribal definition with the 45-21 and the 59-6. And so this is someone who is very tribal, very communal. You can see how important his family and his people and loyalty is to him. And, we're in this together, and his crew. And so I think the 44 is probably significant. On a more personal psychological level, he might feel like, he should be more quick or instinctive when he's meeting people. And maybe that's something that he's really worked to develop. He likes to, from what I've heard, I'm not an expert on Trump, and I honestly, I get saturated pretty quick with a lot of this stuff. But he's known for saying that he's such a great negotiator, the art of the deal and that sort of thing. I bet the 44 plays into that. Like, that's something he's really probably put a lot of attention on, or felt that was a deficit of his early on that he had to then develop in himself, or to get to a point where he knew how to negotiate within those spaces.
Yeah, to sort of to complete that channel.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting, because it's and you can also get that from the astrological chart, where you've got I think he's got Jupiter in the 3rd house in Leo, and that's just hilarious, because it's Libra is the marketplace deals, ruled by Venus, which is associated with arts, and in the 3rd house of contracts, communications, getting things from A to B. Jupiter in the 3rd house in Libra is very, very art of the deal-y, making deals, deal maker.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. The human design transits are very similar to the astrological transits. We're just using a different framework to look at them, but same planets, same positions in the zodiac or in the wheel. Looks like right now, it's interesting. The sun is in 45.5 today, and there's that 45.26. This again is the tribal leader, the king, the ruler. It's the gate of the gatherer. And, but it's the head of the tribe. It's the king, or the queen, or whoever speaks for the tribe or represents the tribe. And it's interesting because the 45 and the 26 are in a polarity. They're opposites in the wheel. So they're really mirrors of each other. If you look at the hexagrams, they're the inverse of each other. And so the earth here, that is in 26.5, which is said to be grounding the expression of the sun. It's like the kind of the point of reference that grounds the expression of the sun. And so that's something that's going on in the transit field for all of us right now. And for him, it's conjoining his north node. So sun's going over his north node. I think we saw that a moment ago in the astrological transits. One interpretation of that is to say that in terms of his life path, his trajectory, and the way he's kind of seeing the world or viewing the world, when we're talking about the personality nodes, the events of this week and over these few days, again, play in strongly, or there's a strong resonance with, the weekly planetary energies through the sun and the earth with, his path, his life story, his trajectory, which again, represented by the nodes in his birth chart. So that would be one way of kind of looking at it.
And it's the gatherer. So would you add that interpretive layer into, okay, if he's getting a transit, which on a gate that's already active, is already active in his channel of materialism, this gathering together is sort of like getting the resources together. Maybe that's getting the troops in, getting the protection going.
Yeah.
He's got a military parade coming up, like showing the resources in a certain extent. But then again, the sun transits through different gates through a week. So I'm not sure if that's how you'd interpret it.
Yeah, it's interesting. This kind of gets back to some of the differences between human design and astrology. And, early on in human design, or oftentimes with people who are just getting into human design, and maybe people have been into it for a while, you'll hear that they'll say, oh, it's not astrology. It's just, no, the human design is very different than astrology. And some people are even in the human design world are pretty down on astrology, or kind of anti-astrology, which I think is really funny because
weird. Yeah, go ahead.
It's
yeah.
But the way I would say it is that human design is an astrological system, but it's not the same thing as astrology. It's not the same framework. It's not the same set of techniques, tools, and methods that we would, associate with most forms of popular astrology today, or really any form of astrology, right? But it is absolutely an astrological system. We have planets, time, date, place of birth, it's like, so, But one of the big differences is the house system, and you can do something of a loose, A-B between the two systems. You can say, okay, both systems have planets, right? And then you've got the idea of signs, and then you have this loose association between the signs and the gates, the hexagrams, the 64 hexagrams, right? They're arranged in the fixed positions around the wheel in the zodiac. So there's a relationship there. But the thing that is really different is the body graph and the 12 houses, right? They're very different. And I think that speaks to a lot of how these systems, are designed, or that they operate in order to kind of show us a different slice of the human experience. So the 12 houses represent these different containers, these different areas or topics of life that contain matters of the material world, of this earthly plane. I mean, the 12 houses represents the earth in a sense, and all the 12-fold division. So it's about, life on the ground, the terrestrial kind of reality that we're all living in. You don't see that in human design. Instead, what you see is these centers, which are roughly associated with the traditional chakra centers. There's a strong association there. But what are they? They're not describing something outside of us. They're describing something inside of us. They're describing, part of our inner processes as humans, our energetic nature. And so that's one of the ways that I've really kind of started working with both human design and astrology, is to recognize, like, when am I talking about something that's internal and about someone's inner world, inner processes, or how their energy is designed to work, and maybe the experiences that they may have in the world as a result, but it's issuing from a deeper kind of energetic place in themselves, versus you can look at it at an astrological chart and you've got the houses. You can start talking about my neighbors and, my guru, and you can talk about, my siblings, or, my creative projects, or my children. It's like,
I have to agree because, as you say, to repeat your point, they're both fundamental astrological systems. There should be no weird disagreement or tribalism between the two. But what I think the how they slot into each other, human design is all about the individual and only the individual, and really the individual mechanics. Whereas astrology, the individual is essentially represented by the ascendant and the sun and the moon, to put the parts together of the ascendant, the body, which generates the context of the rest of the chart. The moon, Vedic systems called the ahankara, is the mind, the emotional mind, mental field, and the sun being the sort of egoic life force. You can kind of piece those together into being the individual, but they're buckets of life. So it's all about the native. The native is what they'll say, the person in their life. Not every single house of the astrology chart is individual. It's brothers, networks, relationships, your career. And I think the psychological astrology kind of gets tripped up into thinking everything in the chart is the individual psychology. The chart might indicate a certain career. Doesn't mean you are that career, but doesn't mean that your personality traits won't complement that career, right? You've got siblings, you've got your home life, you've got vehicles, you've got everything that surrounds the individual in their life. Whereas, and we can get a ton of that. We can get plenty of that. Astrology stands on its own as a valid and useful lens of looking at the individual. But human design is like, okay, do you want to really nail into the individual? Do you want to really analyze how the individual operates? And I think that's why astrology seems to be a little bit better at the timing of the external circumstances. Whereas the transits, it's like, okay, maybe you can argue that this is a energy that someone is feeling, but human design seems to be tailored to the individual only and not the external life circumstances of the individual. It's solely individualistic, and you can extract those points and then layer over the astrological chart to get further detail. So both human design fans and people who are solely human should be able to piece together bits of the astrological chart, and people who are only astrology shouldn't sort of, dismiss human design. Maybe if you use 20% of one, 80% of the other. And as we were saying, all you really need to know is the basics for human design. It's like the basics are there. You can learn that fairly quick. And that gives you such a richer context and interpretation on top of the original chart.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. And I mean, to me, it's almost a little bit like saying, let's say you've got a hammer and you've got a saw, and it's like, which is better? It's like, well, the one does one thing, the other does another thing. Sometimes you pick up the saw, sometimes you pick up the hammer. Knowing what a tool is, I think is really important. Knowing what a system is, knowing what it does, what it's showing is important, because then I think that informs our relationship with it. Like, okay, this one is for looking at this thing. So, if I'm looking for something and this would assist me in that, then I'm going to use this tool. I'm going to use this system. I'm going to use this framework. But if you're right, if I'm going to do something that's more predictive, when's something going to happen in the world? What's it going to look like? What are the themes or the energies that I'm going to be working with in the outside world? I'm going to probably look at the astrological chart. Now, you can interpolate some of that from the human design chart. I think you can, a good human design analyst can sit there and kind of work it out by talking to the person and probably be able to say some things, about a transit that's coming up, but not to the same degree in terms of like the concrete outer world, manifestations of it, which I think some of the better astrologers can really do. Yeah, the interesting thing about this transit chart is it's not forming any new channels or defining any new centers. I mean, we're basically looking at his same definition here, with a couple extra, gate activations, dormant potentials thrown in, coming in through the transit field. But, if we go back to this is his natal chart. This is the transit overlay chart. It's
right. Yeah. So there's only a few, there's no new channels being formed by the transits. Oh, good spot. Nice spot. I didn't notice.
What's the implication of that? What could we say about it? Well, it doesn't seem like the current planetary conditioning that's looked at through the lens of human design is necessarily bringing in some sort of heavy outside influence, and it's more of, I think, kind of a reinforcement or putting more focus on different aspects of himself or his design. It's not like he is being conditioned to be fundamentally different than he is under this set of transits. Yeah, I think that's right. From this viewpoint, I think we'd see different things as we were looking at earlier in the astrological chart. But energetically, in terms of his makeup and design, it just seems like it's strengthening it, reinforcing it, turning up the volume a bit on it, and yet there are different things. I mean, these transits are everyone's transits right now, right? On the right, so we've got the nodes that are still in 36.6. Crisis and conflict, those gates. And, we've got Pluto down here in 41.2 where it's been and will be for a while. Neptune, is a gate 25. It moved in, when it moved into Aries. And so Saturn's in gate 25. So same set of transits. Yeah, the big ones, I've been looking at have been, Pluto and Neptune and Uranus, the outers. They're the slower moving heavies that carry more of an impact. I think starting with Pluto, gate 41 is the gate of decrease, or the gate of contraction. And I think, with Pluto moving into it, this is something that's happening on a very collective level. It's generational, it's collective, it's affecting all of us. It's also, roughly in keeping with the Pluto return here in the U.S., the Pluto going all the way around the wheel. Yeah. And so we're all in something, most of us, I think probably everybody to some degree, but, the majority of people, I think, are experiencing some kind of squeeze right now. Like we're having to really kind of, figure out what we want, why we're here, who we are, get to the truth of our experience. And if you kind of think about like gate 41 and its relationship to gate 30, which is the gate of desire, the clinging fire over in the solar plexus, then, there is this question with Pluto sitting in gate 41. What is the truth of, the experience that I want to have on this planet? What's the truth of my life? What is my fate? And I think we're all kind of being squeezed, or, there's a contraction that is in a sense asking us to kind of get straight with ourselves, to work it out. And, and so,
I'm looking at contraction, and I would sort of say, okay, were we talking about like materialist contraction? You've got a lot of cost of living crises happening in a lot of the Western countries. You've got money printing happening, the value of money being reduced. Lots of people struggling with money. Would you interpret it that way? Pluto in contraction. Definitely. You could assign that interpretation.
Yeah, I feel like it has a lot to do with just the reality of our lives these days. And if you look at at gate 41, it's in the early degrees of Aquarius. 41.2 is around 3 degrees of Aquarius, and Aquarius is a human sign. It's has to do with kind of the collective things on a larger social level. And I kind of think that the contraction, in a way, even though it's being the symbolism is coming in from the planets and through this relationship we have with the cosmos, but I feel like a lot of the contraction is, in a way, it's being manufactured by humans. Like, we're doing this, I think, which is really, I think, gets to the heart of how the program works, because I feel like, it's the planets as forces of consciousness are acting upon us humans, individuals, and then we're expressing those energies. You see what I'm saying? It's like the energy of Pluto, this kind of transformative, deep truth. That's kind of like this unnegotiable truth that we're all having to deal with. That's the way I kind of look at Pluto is, it's in gate 41, and it's basically imprinting, conditioning the collective to operate a certain way, and who are then being kind of influenced to behave and to do certain things, to make certain decisions. And so I think that, we basically, in the same way that we see the expression of gates and planets through our individual design in our birth chart, we see the transits kind of acting out or playing out through our human actions. In other words, if you took humans out of the picture here, I don't know how much contraction the animals out there in the wild or in nature would be feeling. I don't know. It's an interesting question. Yeah, and I think we can read a fair amount through human design. If you look at like Neptune's been moving through early Aries. It's in gate 25. Now it's up to line 5, go retrograde. But gate 25 is the gate of spirit, the spirit of self in the G center, gate of innocence, universal love. And the nature, the action of Neptune often is to in a way veil, obscure, and then to ultimately, usually later in the process or afterwards, to unveil, to reveal, kind of the reality of it. And so it feels like there's this question coming up now, and I'm seeing this in the world of what you would call the world of spirituality, I guess, which is, I can't quite figure out how to talk about it, but the space that we're operating in,
New Age people,
New Age, spiritual, and what you're seeing on the surface is not what's going on. There's so much. It's almost like, you think about like the nature of Neptune, and Neptune's also often associated with kind of a mystique, or like, you see certain celebrities who have strong Neptunes because they can draw the projections of others, and people kind of project their imagination of who they are, and there's a kind of a glamour, to it in a way. And I feel like that's part of what we're seeing with Neptune moving through gate 25 is, it's not so clear like what the true spirit of things really is. Is this person actually who they say they are? Are they, is this a real representation of love or spirit or self? Or is this an illusion? Is this a production? Is this a manufactured reality? Are the optics, lining up with the reality underneath? And
so we try and apply that to the G center, and that's affecting Trump's G center. So you take that interpretation and say, is this Trump's real direction? Is this where he's going? There's a bit of confusion and illusion around his direction, what he's going to do next, sort of thing. How people are confused as to, he doesn't seem quite the type of person that I voted for, 6 months ago. He's going in a different direction, but I'm not sure if he's got a plan, or the tariffs, are they 4D chess, or is he actually, just not very good with economics? It's like people are struggling to project onto him now. People don't know where he's going.
Yeah.
Is that how you take that interpretation and layer it on his chart?
Well, I would, but I would have to include all of us, because these are the cosmic, seas that we're swimming in. It's like, yes, we're looking at Trump's chart right now, but it's also in your chart. It's in my chart. It's a collective, kind of planet, Neptune. It affects things, on a societal level. Because it's in Trump's completely open G center, I don't know that it's affecting him necessarily any more than it would be anyone else, you and me. But I think he's subject to the same confusing kind of background field that we're all in, right. And he's swimming in it too. And then if you look at the other gate that's showing up in the G center, it's Jupiter in gate 15, the gate of extremes, the extremes of humanity. Right. So, and then can we find some balance in these extremes, and what is the real spirit of things? And can we actually see it right now? Or is it veiled, or is it confusing? And do we know what we're dealing with? And so, yeah, I think when I'm looking at transits in a human design chart, if I want to see something that's going to personally affect the person, I'll look at a gate that's forming a new channel. Or it's, you've got a planet on a bridge gate that can be a big conditioning hook. Or it's somehow defining a new center, and it's bringing in kind of that center theme. But in this case, it's interesting. It's like, I don't see any major themes coming up that he's necessarily dealing with that we're all not also dealing with. He's in it too. If he was coming in as my client, I would really reinforce, like, hey, slow down and wait for clarity, because anything you do, it's going to have an impact, especially if you're president of the United States, right? So wait for clarity. Know that if you just fly off the handle, or you just start, doing things, and he's done a lot of things in this administration and this particular presidency very, very quickly. It's like he'd been planning for like 4 years, going back to, like what was going on those last 4 years when, besides trying to stay out of jail and in the courts and all that, it's like he came in with okay, well, when I get into office, here we go. I'm going to hit the gas again. Yeah. And, but there is a time to wait, for time for stillness, to hold back, to not act. And I think that his Mars is kind of geared towards this. And it's interesting that it's on his ascendant. So this is a major theme in his life that he's had to deal with from day one, his impulsiveness, and his need to be, again, kind of the center of attention and out front, to have a certain amount of recognition for being an action guy, being decisive, things that we would associate with Mars in the first house and in Leo. But the third line, I would imagine, through time learns the hard way usually, or you would hope.
Was there anything when you first discovered human design that really clicked for you in context of your own birth chart? Because the thing with astrologers, obviously, they overanalyze their own charts, of course. But was there some examples of things that made sense for you when you were learning about the gates and the centers in human design that sort of clicked and reinforced certain aspects of your own birth chart? Now, I don't mean for you to give away all the details of your birth chart, but just any key things that made sense to you.
Well, I've got a pretty open design. So I've got one channel, the 2551, which, runs from the heart, gate 51, to the 25 in the G center. And so I've got 2 centers defined through one channel and 7 undefined centers. And I think one of the early things that really helped me in terms of kind of reframing, my life and my experiences up to that point was just how much openness I had. And then understanding that as a projector and having a very receptive, deeply absorbing aura, how much I was taking in from my environment. Having an undefined sacral, for example, when I had, spent a good 20 years working in like corporate jobs and running around, like really trying to compete, with the manifesting generator kind of paradigm or world. And it didn't work out for me. I hit my late 30s and I was just in a deep state of burnout. And so human design comes along a little bit later. And then I get to see the chart. I get to see the design. I start understanding, how to interpret it and what it means. And I realized that a lot of what I had experienced when I was a kid was a lot of amplification. And then I would say a kind of distortion associated with that as well. Like, having an open throat, for example, when I was a kid in grade school, I would often get in trouble. My grades were okay, but I would, when we were being kind of rated or graded on conduct, our behavior, it was always like, average or below average. Like, yeah, I didn't really follow the rules very well. I was a bit of a kind of a clown, seeking attention. I could see some of the not self themes of behavior. I have gate 18 3 times, which often has issues with authority. I'm a 2551. Astrologically, I've got moon in Aries. There's a lot of things that kind of point in the direction like, yeah, this guy's going to have struggle a little bit with rules and authority. And he's going to probably do things his own way. And then you combine in the amount of openness, the lack of definition of how deeply I could be conditioned by others in my environment. And then, what often will happen is that conditioning will sometimes distort the definition in a way. So like the definition itself is, I would say the definition isn't not self. The definition is what just defines us. It makes us, it's the most consistent part of our life force. But if we're operating from the undefined areas of our chart, taking in a lot of conditioning, and we're not very aware or wise about that dynamic and what's going on, we'll often find that it distorts our definition in the way that we start acting out in ways that aren't maybe in the highest alignment for ourselves. So for me with 2551, I would try to be shocking. I would try to wake people up. I would, be, quote unquote, a bad projector, instead of waiting to be recognized and invited for whatever capacity I brought to a situation or a relationship. I would take initiative and say, I'm just going to go do this thing, attention seeking, try to shock someone, not know when enough is enough in the process. And so I got to kind of see all of that. I got to reevaluate and to look at that, some of those dynamics. And that's just basic, like center and definition level stuff before you even get into like more of the nuances or, I did mention gate 18 3 times, which is, known as having, some issues with authority. I can see that, Trump's got it. He's got it, twice as well in his Neptune.
Nice.
But yeah, there are a lot of things. And then, just the general idea of what it meant to be a projector really made sense to me. In the beginning, when I first learned about being a projector, I think I took a lot of things in human design as, I didn't really know the context or where to put them. I didn't know how important is this piece versus that piece. And, is this thing non-negotiable or does it have some play? Is this thing, I hadn't worked all that out. That's why they refer to it as an experiment, right? But over time, you start kind of learning and understanding your design on a deeper level. And so I remember, learning about what it meant to be a projector, and it made a lot of sense. It connected a lot of dots, explained a lot of things. And, like, for example, I grew up in a family of all generators, and it was pretty obvious that I was not like that. I couldn't do some of the things they did. I felt different in a lot of ways. And so this was one explanation of it. But as I've, gone further with human design, and I guess as my relationship with it continues to evolve, I do think that there's something absolutely to type, but it's more of a generalization, because even within like the projector type, you have so much, different differentiation.
The variation.
So much variation. And you get like an emotional projector versus a mental projector, very different projectors. You can have a projector with 3 motors defined, right? You can have a projector with no motors defined. It's like, so, I think what I'm learning is that greater nuance is usually helpful. Greater specificity is helpful if we really want to start kind of getting into talking about, how unique and different we all are. If we're going to start just kind of throwing everyone into like 4 different buckets, it's going to be of limited usefulness. And so on one hand, learning that I was a projector really made a lot of sense, connected dots. And on the other hand, it's continued to evolve.
And how is Human Design Collective going for you so far these days?
It's going pretty well. I feel like, Amy and I, we're continuing to teach classes. We kind of move at our own pace. And we've always kind of had to do, is we're both pretty strong individuals. We've had to kind of do things our own way while still trying to, to do right by, the larger, the larger community and the organizations and all that. And so, we've got some really good students that we're working with. We'll usually run like, maybe 2, maybe 3 classes at a time, still doing some session work. And, it's going good. Things are a little bit slower than they've been in the past, which is good because I think we were kind of overworked.
Overdoing it.
We had a lot going on as two projectors. So it's kind of stabilizing and settling out a little bit. But it does feel like it's in a constant state of evolution. And, just in terms of just the larger landscape and our own relationship to it. But it's going pretty good. Yeah. We're putting podcasts out, got some new courses coming out. So yeah, it's
so nice to be with a partner who can kind of be on the same wavelength there.
It's daily. It's like Amy said the other day, she was talking to someone and said, we have both the blessing and the curse of both being into this stuff and talking about it every morning and every evening, every day, for better or for worse. And so we're just in it, but
till death do us part. Yeah. Human design every day.
Sometimes, we spend so much time looking at this stuff and talking about it or sitting on screens that as soon as we're done, we just go straight outside into the garden. And it's like, let's just go take a walk, get out in nature, look at something that's not digital, get our hands in there. And that's been kind of a saving grace, I would say, is like keeping that connection to nature.
Oh, listen, John, I'm mindful I've taken up so much of your time today, but I really, really appreciate how in depth you've gone with our talk today. And I really appreciate it because it's nice to have someone who's so experienced with this over time, decades of experience. It's very generous of you. Yeah,
my pleasure. It's nice to connect. And I appreciate, you reaching out and, I've enjoyed it. It's been fun. So, and hopefully, some of this perspective is helpful. And I think we're all, again, in this kind of interesting space. And we got to figure out what we can trust in ourselves and what we can trust in the world. And the way will open up.
Awesome. Look, John, I'll get going because that's a great way to end.
All right.
I really appreciate it.
Have a great night and a great rest of the week. And anything else comes up, reach out.
Will do. You too, John. Really appreciate it.
Okay. All right.